Welcome and greetings, everybody. This is the PLP Pathways webinar number 3. Today, we're going to be talking about family engagement and student-led conferences. We want to welcome our contributors. We also want to thank the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education and the Middle Grades Collaborative for supporting this work. Don't forget also that you can watch this live. Hopefully you are. If not, you can also watch it as a recording on our PLP Pathways YouTube channel, and you can follow us on PLP Pathways on Twitter. So the first thing I'd like to do, starting with Meg O'Donnell, is if you guys could introduce yourselves, just tell us who you are and what's going on. Here we go, Meg.
Sure. Meg O'Donnell. I teach on the Alpha team at Shelburne Community School. And one person is hoping not for a snow day tomorrow because our annual Alpha plays tonight and tomorrow night.
Okay.
There we go.
Maura.
Hi, I'm Maura Wieler. I'm the Proficiency-Based Learning and Technology Integration Coach at Lamoille South Supervisory Union.
Okay. Lindsey.
Hi, I'm Lindsey Hallman. I am a Program Director at Up for Learning.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kevin Hunt. I'm a 5'8 generalist on Swift House and Williston Central School.
Okay, and today Kevin's going to start us out. We're talking about family engagement and also student-led conferences and sort of a larger theme of communicating out to our families and making sure that they're engaged and involved in what we're doing. Kevin, you want to take it away?
Yep. So going over the what, as Don said, we're really looking at family engagement here. And to start, we have a quote. This is from Joyce Epstein. It says, "The way schools care about children is reflected in the way schools care about the children's families. If educators view children simply as students, they are likely to see the family as separate from the school. That is, the family is expected to do its job and leave the education of the children to the schools. If educators view students as children, they are likely to see both the family and the community as partners with the school in children's education and development." This definitely spoke to me as a quote, just because I know in a video that Don had posted, I'd spoken before about how important it is to connect with families and build relationships with families. And one thing I know Lindsey had sent me a couple of great quotes too that get at the idea of involvement versus engagement with families, and that being, when you're involving a family, it's really it's the school's agenda. You're getting them to volunteer and parent in positive ways by supporting them at home, versus engaging. You're considering you're really giving the parents a stake in everything, and the parent is considered a leader who's a critical player in identifying that shared vision and goal of the school, and you're creating more of a shared community versus just this is what we're doing and help out in these ways. And I think it's just crucial because the research definitely shows that the more parents are involved and engaged, more so engaged with their students' learning, the better off their student is doing in school. And that's definitely backed by some serious research that's been going on. So it's just of the utmost importance, I think, that we engage with these families and build these positive communities right from the get-go and start that communication early versus waiting and just saying, here's something that you can volunteer for, or here's a way you can chaperone. Those are awesome things for parents to do and ways to be involved. But I think if we're really trying to develop the sense of community and wrap around our kids, there needs to be this sense of engagement and really letting the parents, have a critical role and be a player in these conversations. So I know we are working on getting one of our, we had a parent lined up to join us, and we're just having some technology difficulties with that. So I think, while we're trying to get her queued up, I think it'd be great to hear maybe from our colleagues here on the panel about what ways do you go about engaging families.
Would you like me to take on my facilitation
That'd
here?
be great.
Okay, so the first question is exactly what Kevin just said. How do you engage families through communication? So what are different ways in which you communicate with families that promote family engagement and moving from this concept of involvement which is, as Kevin stated, is really kind of like not looking at families and parents as partners or leaders, to engagement where they are in a partnership and they're a leader in their child's educational experience.
Well, Lindsey, can I just talk to this point for a minute? Because I think this is really important. And I think that I've spent a lot of time doing simple outreach. So we have a blog and we have letters and we have communications out to the parents. But I think the difference is, and as Kevin was creating the content for this webinar, it's really that engagement piece that you just went over, and how do you involve them so that they're engaged and a part of what's happening in your classes, that you're not just telling them what you're doing. And so as we're talking about this, I think I know that that's what I'm focused on, is how am I actually bringing parents in so that they have maybe a leadership role or an advisory role, or that they can ask questions about the curriculum, or that they can ask questions about what's happening in the classroom. And so defining that engagement, I think, is really important, because I believe that that really is a step above and beyond what a lot of teachers are doing. And then there's also, I just want to add real quick, is there's this piece of equity too. How are we making sure that we're engaging all parents and their students? So as you're facilitating this part of the conversation, it's just important, I think, to consider those higher levels that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I just would share one. I know I'm facilitating, but I was also going to give an example. But one of the ways that I found one of the activities or experiences that I found to be the most profound for the middle level students that I worked with was having that, what I always look at as like the triangle. Like, we all hold a very important part of that triangle, and without one of those pieces, the triangle wouldn't be whole. And so on Monday, we would have our learners write an email to their advisor and a trusted adult, whether that's a parent, a caregiver, or potentially an adult in the building that served as their trusted adult or community member. And they would share their weekly goals with them and what the focus of our week was going to look like, just an outline of kind of like, this is what my week looks like. This is what my hopes are for the week. These are my goals. This is what I hope to accomplish. And this is the support I need. And then on Friday, we would sandwich that at the end of the week with another letter home, talking about what was accomplished, and also what areas they would like to work on for the future week, and where they might need support, and any highlights from the week. So I found that to be pretty much the most powerful way of engaging all families, because it invited them into the conversation in a really low risk way, because the communication was coming from their child or their family member. And so I found that to be a way to really get to know both the learner and their family. I'm curious about other panel members. What are some ways that you communicate with families?
I'm happy to chime in. So we as well have been doing Friday emails for a long time. We try to provide some variety for kids to reflect on their week in different ways, so that it keeps the engagement for kids in terms of sharing. Why are we sharing a Friday email? What's that about? So sometimes it might be like a rose, a bud, and a thorn, or sometimes it might be a 3-2-1 process. If there was an experience that we all had collectively, whether it was a school-wide hike or, just play announcements or whatever it is, we also put the responsibility a little bit on the kids around updating parents about key events that are happening in the week. Like in this, and we help to sort of structure that email a little bit so that it's beyond just like 35 emojis of like, hey, I had a good week, smiley face, smiley face, smiley face, but it's really a communication. So it's a writing tool. And the thing that I love seeing about that is just the parent response. Like you get such a window into the parent-child dynamic, whether and it's just a really nice way to sort of like communicate with families. So that's one way. And this was something that we used to have that has gone away a little bit just because of the advancement of technology, but we've tried to keep it going for as many years as we could, which is a parent council. So we used to have a parent council that would meet anywhere from when it was in full swing, it was once a month. When it started to peter out, it was 2 to 3 times a year. It would be at the beginning of the year, at the middle of the year, and at the end of the year. And that parent council, we'd stay at school till like 5 o'clock, and we'd break bread. So some parents would sign up to bring salad or a dish to share. And we would share some of the needs that the team might have. And then the parents would communicate with us about, hey, here's some things that we're, hearing out in the community, or here's some ways that we'd like to be involved. And we would also sometimes have like a guest speaker come in. We had a doctor come in who talked to families about adolescent anxiety and how to like support your child if they're experiencing these things. So when it was at its best, it was that. It would be nice to try to get back to that at some point, but that was one way of engaging families and really partnering with them.
Maura?
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really exciting and part of Act 77 is opening the door to really pushing student-led conferences and encouraging those to happen across schools.
Did that work?
One of the things that we're doing is K-12, we have students involved in their conferences at different levels, and that's really exciting to see here across our schools. One of the things, sort of as Lindsey was sharing about her Friday letter and Meg was sharing about seeing students respond, we would a lot of times as our team, when I was in the classroom, we would create scenarios where students would go home and do something with their parents, and then either film a conversation or record the conversation that they had with their parents, and then we would follow up. So this might be, we did some work around like a family media agreement where it provided a space for families to have conversations about technology expectations in the house and digital citizenship. And because every kid has an iPad or has technology that goes home, we found that that was one way to sort of keep families in the loop and to keep the conversations going. And then we would follow up either with a phone call or an email or something like that. So just being creative, because I think technology does help so that not everyone has to be physically in one space to be able to collaborate. And so that was something that we tried to capitalize on. And then we do a lot of different things. We have a group of high school students who are doing communicating school redesign, and they would do sort of nights engaging our high school parents and getting some feedback about our new proficiency, or not new, but our shift to the proficiency-based learning system, and rolling up some of that work. And that's really helped to get feedback from parents to help think about how we communicate some of these shifts with them. And it's really exciting to see at the different levels how parents are involved and engaged based on the developmental level of their students.
Okay. Kevin, do you want to introduce our guests?
Absolutely. So we got her on board here. So this is Melissa Akey, who we actually had 3 of her kids come through Swift House, and one is, our 2 are now in high school, and one is at CVU. So we're just welcoming Melissa as our parent guest so she can shed some light on the topic from a parent perspective.
Hi, everyone. Sorry it took me so long.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Sorry about the overhead there. So I just wanted to go back to, we heard some good ideas here, especially about engaging parents. And I just wonder also about how we can make sure. So, for example, we just had student-led conferences, and we traditionally have pretty good participation, 80, 85%. but what are we doing to engage those parents who can't make it to the school, or it's at a tough time, or who may not be comfortable at the school? And what are some strategies that folks are doing for those families? And the other thing too, I just wonder, Lindsey, I continually mention this, and Meg too, is that email home. I agree that email gives us an opportunity to see how kids are, the relationships they have with their folks and their families. And I think that's a great window, because it can help us learn more about the identity of our students. And the more we can have events like that, or maybe the recordings, as Maura mentioned, where you see kids interacting with their parents, I think that gives us a deeper understanding of what's happening. And I just wanted to add one, it's sort of a question before we hear from our parent guest, is I was in a meeting today where we were talking about, we're concerned about some kids, and could the PLP be a tool to engage parents? Could we be using that not just as a mechanism to show student growth and learning, but could we use that as a platform for parents and students to be communicating and to be sharing with us? And what might that look like in the future? And is there a way that we could start building in some of the activities perhaps that Maura was mentioning, of the conversations or the collaborations? Could we be, putting that into the PLP and using that as a way to communicate? So those are...
So I lost connection for a second. I was just wondering, I probably missed some of my facilitation, but Don, you just posed a couple of questions, and I'm wondering if we're going to respond to those questions before we go to our guests. Because I think you posed a question about student conferences and how do we engage families during the conference, and I think it would probably be helpful to answer that question.
Yeah, I assume, again, these are just as we're having these conversations and planning for this particular webinar about family engagement. And the other, just to mention to our audience out there, the reason that we're having this family engagement topic now is many of us have just finished our first round of student-led conferences, or those are sometimes in the, the mid to late fall. And so for me, those happened a week ago. So those are very fresh in my mind. And I'm constantly thinking about how we can engage families to support all students. And any thoughts from the panel about those student-led conferences would be great.
Yeah, I would chime in and say that if we're going to truly engage all families, then we need to meet them where they are, and that this model of families coming in for 20 minutes at a time and sitting down and looking at work and it's kind of antiquated. And so, and I know we've talked about this in the past, but I was always a very big fan of doing what we ended up calling the flipped conference, where it was really a conversation that happened at home, and it was part of their weekly goals. So they would have a couple weeks time to think through this and coordinate a time with their parent, caregiver, trusted adult to sit down for 20, 30 minutes and talk through a number of talking points and think about, what are there have been successes, what are some areas that they would like to grow in, what are some, things that they want to share about just in general around connected to maybe the goals that they're formulating for the year. And then if they could come to the table, because there's always that traditional conference day, then the conversation wasn't about us looking at this evidence in their PLP or looking at what they're doing in each of their classes. It was more about a conversation around their goals and their hopes for the year, and also around their year-long project work. So, and more of just a conversation and a dialogue with with that triangle piece around, the roles that each of us play and how we can support one another. And so it was less about how am I doing in science and how am I doing in math and whatnot, but more about really more of a much more powerful conversation around, what do we all want and where are we going and how are we going to support one another. And so the Flip conference seems to me to be, again, another why aren't we doing that? Because it's not easy for families to get into schools and make the times and fit into our little windows of time that we offer. Nor is it always a comfortable place. So let's meet them where they are, and this conversation is one that we should trust that the students are going home and having. I don't think we need to like be there to check off that they had that conversation.
Any other input?
Just to piggyback, there's sort of two things that that come to mind. We would sometimes, for students who, if the schedule didn't work, or students and parents who couldn't come in for the conference day, we of course would always call them and try and find a time that would work, or we would offer to do sometimes we would actually have them, we used a Google form just to keep track and document parents that came in, because part of the PLP is documenting parent engagement in the process. And so we would have the student go and do the conference at home and fill out the Google form. And then we would always have a phone conversation. So sometimes, I would have the student in the room with me, and we'd put the parent on speakerphone and, have that part of the conversation together, just sort of try and get creative. But I think, as Lindsey said, they don't necessarily have to be physically in our space, because it's really hard. It's really hard to sometimes, find a way to be there. We also would, a lot of times we offer babysitting. So we have a lot of 8th grade students who go through babysitting courses. And so we a lot of times provide childcare at the school. And so that's something else that we do. But I think the key is just making those connections. And it also always helps to make contact with parents before the conference for good things. I think it's always important to show that you want to be a partner. And it just is more inviting to try and encourage parents to come in.
Can I just one thing? And I I'm wearing both hats because I'm also a teacher too, but and I teach younger kids, so this might not fit completely into your age level, but we have done home visits for certain kids before conference time, and then also offer to go to the home for conferences. And there's something magical that happens when you are in their home for these kids. And again, they're a little bit younger, so it might be a little bit different, but there's just something that happens between, the relationship with the child and also the parents that just builds this comfort level, which at first when I thought about it, I was like, that's going to be really uncomfortable for everybody. I'm not sure that's going to work. And it actually was the complete opposite. So, and obviously you couldn't do it for every single child, but I think kids that you really are having a hard time, sometimes parents really appreciate you just coming to their house and having some neutral ground, or maybe at a place that is a little more neutral. I don't know. That's just a thought that I have.
Yeah, one of my first conferences actually was off-site at one of my friend's houses, because her guardians couldn't make it to the conference. So we just made the arrangement to go there. I know that meant the world to that family. And just going back to a couple of the points Lindsey was making, we very seldom use our conference days here. Our conferences are scheduled before and after schools for about 2 months because they take roughly 35 to 40 minutes because it is that conversation. And I would say, 90 to 95% is around the PLP. And then, if we need to check out a report, then we look at that. But most of it is those student goals. In an ideal sense, I would love to get more of that flip concept of having the students go and look over their PLP at home. We kind of tried doing that a little bit, but it still got to the point where when we would get to the conference, it was the first time the parents were seeing the PLP. But again, it was just an awesome opportunity for us to all be present and see that student advocate for themselves and reflect on their learning and their growth, with that being the focus. Again, like Lindsey said, we don't say, how are you doing in this class? How are you doing in that class? It's, let's really look at your goals, and let's look at, the progress you've made over this trimester. And based on that, and based on the evidences that you've collected, they ultimately make the decision. Should they keep them or should they move on? So that for me turns it into more of a powerful experience.
I was just going to add one little thing about I think something too that helps, because we have had some students sometimes that have flipped the conversation. I think helping kids rehearse what it is that they want to share in that conversation with their families is really important. And this is a lot of times where our goals partners help with that. So they have a little rehearsal, they have it with me, and that just gives them the confidence to sit down and talk about their work and face, like, they know their parents better than we do. So they know the kinds of questions that they're going to have, either criticism or praise or whatever, they can anticipate what those questions are going to be like. So we've done a couple of different things where sorry, hang on one sec.
And you can get out there to board. Thank you.
We've done things where we've sent the portfolio or the work home without the student necessarily having the conversation first, to give parents a chance to look at the work and put sticky notes on questions. And then when the student and the parents come down to sit at their conference, the work has been seen by parents. There's sticky notes there so that the student can say, oh, mom and dad have a question about this piece of work. Sometimes that just helps to neutralize and de-escalate some of the angst that might come from that. I think the Friday emails has eased a lot of that over the years because there's more frequency of seeing the work. And the only other thing I was just going to add was food is always a good driver. Like just, telling families, hey, we'll have lots of snacks or plenty of food or whatever it is, so that especially if it's around dinner time, that can ease some of the pressure of trying to get to school and juggle family life as well.
Awesome. So you think maybe we can move on to part 2? Maura, you want to take over?
Yeah, that sounds great. Melissa, we're so excited to have you here. And especially since you wear both hats, right? Like you have your hat as a parent and then your hat as an educator. And so we're really excited to hear a little bit about your experience. So what have your experiences been with both communication and engagement with your children's teachers sort of over the years?
Yeah. So it's varied, obviously, depending on grade levels, but I'm going to focus mostly on my children's time in middle school in Swift House, because that I think was the model that really prepared them for high school and beyond. And just thinking about that, and I had 3 kids that 2 are now in college and 1 is a junior at CVU and 1's a sophomore and 1's a senior in college. And just thinking about that time and that community that they were in over and what was so successful about it, because I sort of read the question beforehand. And I think, as with everything, it comes down to the relationships. And the relationships that were formed during those years for my kids with their teachers really happened. And I think the whole family really happened because there was multiple opportunities to connect outside of academics. So by the time you got to sitting down at the PLP conferences, there was just this connection that it already existed. And I think for me, it was really strong because I had so many kids going through. So, I mean, my time or our time in Swift House spanned over the course of 12 years. So, there was multiple campouts that we were on. There were multiple times that we were on field trips and participating in fundraisers. And there were just so many things and so many traditions and cultures that happened in that house that just made the community so tight that I feel like, but when we were sitting down for the conferences, it was really easy to then go to that level of like, the teacher that we're talking to really knows my child and really knows like what are the study skills that they need to help them get through this. What are the goals seemed so appropriate for each one of my children. And they're also very different and all needed such very different things. So when I really think of it big picture, that's what really sticks out to me, and which is so different when they're in high school. Obviously, it gets old. It's so different, and you're not as involved. But there's just, when I think of them in lower grades too, there was never that same amount of involvement, and so the connections were just never as strong, and that really helped a lot. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that is such a big part of what made it work and made it seem so meaningful.
Do you think that, and this wasn't necessarily on these questions, but do you think that being in a team that loops with your students, do you think that that helps to sort of connect parents to the larger community or build those relationships? I'm just curious if maybe that, because, you know, talking about it spanning 12 years, like that's a lot of time to form that relationship. So I'm wondering if you think that.
And some teachers switched and changed throughout that time too, but I think parents were just encouraged to be such a big part of the community. I mean, there were parent retreats, there were, the field trips are so huge, and there's such it's almost a week's 4 days worth of time that you're together with parents at the end of the year after doing all these other things that happen. So connections, yes, to the broader community in terms of parents connecting with parents, and also sort of in a mentoring kind of way. So like if I'm somebody that has been in Swift House for so many years and I'm on the field trip, I'm, talking to other parents and giving them information about what it's like. So yes, I think that it does help to connect with other people and the broader community. In terms of outside of the house, you do that. There are so many opportunities to do that as well in a community. So that, I think that does happen too.
What would you say is sort of been the most effective methods of engaging parents in your experience as a parent in the Swift House? I know you've mentioned a few, but which do you think were most effective?
Most effective to engaging parents.
Yeah.
So is that like a broad question just in terms of engagement in school, or are you specifically looking at just for the academic piece and the portfolio piece?
I think both, because I think both engagement in terms of building those relationships with the team, but then also engagement in the academics and in sort of partnering with the teacher and with they go hand in hand. You can't separate the two. But what I'll say for our family is that the engagement starts immediately when you start the year. So, kids are assigned a mentor, and there's some activity that goes along with that parents are, kind of responsible for being a little bit of a part of, transport, and also, some presentation time, I guess. And then from there, it moves into other traditions that the house has created, like the camp out, and parents get pretty involved with that as well. And even if you're not someone that's on the camp out, there is a time during the camp out weekend or days that parents can come and be there just for the campfire, which is another huge tradition that happens. So all of these things are slowly building this community, and slowly for the 5th graders entering, but pretty solid for the 7th and 8th graders that are already there. So that and then there's other opportunity. Then there's the play, and parents are sorry. Do you need to? Is there something else?
Oh no, no.
And there's a play, and people are involved in helping with the set. There's just so many different opportunities where you're meeting with other parents and talking to other parents, and then so by the time you get to it's conference time, you've been so involved. I don't think you would dare say, "Oh, I'm not showing up." I mean, certain people. I'm sure it's hard. It's harder for others than some, but you're just pretty invested and involved at that point, and so you're looking forward to that piece of it. And I feel like there's a comfort level. So even if there's some information that you're going to hear that's maybe difficult or challenging about your child, it's pretty comfortable by that.
So
Maura,
it sounds like.
Sorry, Maura, can I just ask a quick follow-up question?
Yep.
So Melissa, I heard two things that were very interesting to me. One is that you said that the immediate engagement, so like right when school's starting, the teachers are reaching out to the families. You said that was particularly effective. And then also you mentioned this idea of parents mentoring other parents. Can you just, did that happen to you when you were sort of a first-year parent on the Swift House? And can you imagine ways that teachers could do that, could facilitate parent to parent sort of networking and mentoring, and just any other ideas? Especially what's particularly interesting to me, I guess, is this idea of a timeline that we kind of meet with the parents and families right away.
Mm-hmm.
And just any other details would be very much appreciated.
Yeah. I would say that most of that, the mentoring of parents, was very informal.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was thinking about it, it sort of just happened, and it kind of happens in your community anyway. And it can be pretty negative or it can be pretty positive. When you think about placement and you think about, parents getting pretty uptight about where their kids are going the next year or who the new teacher is going to be. And so I think for my experience, when I think about my first child moving over, we went from, he did a 4-year house, which was first, second, third, and fourth, and then was moving into another house and did not have a particularly great experience in his lower elementary school. And so by the time he was in 4th grade, ready to go to 5th, I was like, it has to be somewhere that's really going to engage him or he's kind of done with the school, So he ended up in Swift. And so parents that were already there, because I didn't know much about it. I mean, I thought it was going to be the right place for him, but I didn't know that much about it. But parents that were already there would just sort of, because there was that opportunity early on to connect via, I think it was the camp out, and the two that come to mind are the camp out that is pretty kid driven, and then parents help with what they've set up. And then the other was the mentee mentoring that is between, the students, but there's a lot of information that goes home to parents about that. And at that point, and I can't remember if that continued through the years, Kevin, you might remember, but at that point, they also did then hook up parents of the mentors and mentees. The parents had a time to also connect and meet and talk about what Swift House is like. And like I said, there are so many traditions and there's such a culture that parents that had been there for a few years were really able to articulate what it was that was so special and what they loved about it. And it just keeps passing down.
Thank you very much.
Things that come to mind.
Yep. Thanks.
Can I just add one little thing to that too? Because we started a little parent buddies, just like goals partners. We had parent buddies. And that was a great way, especially for new families coming onto the team. One thing we just did this year was we just asked families, hey, is there anyone who'd be willing to answer questions for incoming parents? And we got a list of like 8 to 10 families, and we put their names and their emails on our website as parent. So I don't have any data like how many have reached out to them or anything like that, but I think just having another parent to reach out to say, hey, we have some questions, we heard this, and maybe to try to build up the positive and sort of tamp down some of the negative, like you said, Melissa, I think is a really important resource for families.
That's a good idea.
I know from a teaching perspective, I know one thing we really appreciated, I didn't have Melissa's oldest son, but I had the next two, but we knew that the Akies were a big presence in Swift House, and we would have our curriculum nights early in the year. Melissa, I think you came to just about every one of them, and those returning parents, because we had several siblings come through, it was really powerful for us that, during our little spiel that we would give to the new families or anybody else that would come about curriculum night, a lot of those returning families were there as well. And we would, at some point, just again, like informally turn it over to them and say, is there anything else like you guys would like to add from the parent perspective? And that was a really neat opportunity for, again, them to, because we were kind of given the teacher perspective on everything, but then especially the new 5th grade parents were able to hear from the returning parents about, oh yeah, like let me tell you about this side of the field trips and our experiences with the camp out and this, that, and the other thing. And that was really powerful, I think, for especially our new families to hear from these families who have been there for over 4 years. So it's, again, it was more informal. We didn't schedule that. It always happened that we'd have returning families come to those curriculum nights, luckily, but from our perspective, we were so grateful for that input.
Yeah.
I just have one sort of follow-up. I know that you talked a little bit about the conferences and the PLP. How do you think these conferences impacted your students' engagement and ability to advocate for themselves? And sort of has that helped them when they've transitioned to high school?
Is that for me? Or?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. So I would say that my kids were, all three of them, extremely well prepared for high school, because much of what was happening in Swift House was sort of the mini model of what they also experienced when they went to CBU high school. And so there was a lot of exposure to things that then when they like Shakespeare, that's one in particular, they do a whole Shakespeare unit, and my kids got to high school and then ended up just had like this really strong knowledge of that piece. And they were in, I can't, there's just so many similar. There was an advisory time that they have with an advisor in high school, which is also similar to some time that they have in school too. So I think the biggest thing is there was a lot of control over their learning in middle school and developing their study habits and goals, that when they got to high school, I just felt like they were really, really well prepared to sort of take on their own learning. Mm-hmm. And I think that, it stemmed from the model that was, I mean, they did, two of the things that they do in Swift House, I think you still do it, are sort of the independent learning projects, and it happens twice throughout the year. And as they get older, it becomes a little more complex and involved. So they're doing the same thing from 5th through 8th grade in terms of the model of how they're doing it, but it's getting more and more involved. So there was so many opportunities to present, to research their learning and figure out what it is they want to do, that really by the time they got to high school, they were ready to do that kind of stuff and be pretty independent with their learning.
Great, thank you so much. I don't know if we want to move to questions of from the field.
Sure, I can facilitate that if you think. There's a couple questions here about some of the logistics of structuring conferences. So we could just throw it out to the panel and see how it goes. But one of them is really around, and Kev, you alluded to this earlier, but finding that time for productive conferences. How do people make time for having a productive conference where you're not feeling pulled or you're not looking at the clock? What are some strategies maybe that have helped to manage that time piece?
Meg, I just, one of the things that keeps coming up when I hear Kev talk about scheduling the conferences, and I know that I had 46 conferences or 42 conferences in a day and a half. Ooh. And to me, that's the bring them in, get them out model. And I'm just wondering if in the future, well, especially I'm thinking about progressions. And so since I know the 8th graders fairly well, and I've had contact with their families, why not start the conferences, mornings and after school in September? And so get a real jump on that. And then because those kids have already had experience in our program and with our team, have them set their goals a little bit early, because I know I have a clearer view of their identity and, where they want to go. And then as Kevin also mentioned, if you could have that in a more relaxed setting over the course of, September and early October, so that then when you do have your formal conference, if you want to even call it that, that as Melissa brought up, you've had so many contacts with the family, or you've had at least more contacts with the family, that you can get right down to the student goals and what the student wants to achieve. So, one thing that I'm seriously considering is moving to that model of, extending out the conferences so that we can have more and frequent contacts with the families, so that we can engage them, and then use that time for conferences in the late fall to just have the students maybe present. So that's just one thing I'm thinking about, because we keep getting more kids and they keep giving us the same amount of time for conferences. Right. And it's exhausting for everybody, I think.
And I think that's where you could really consider the role of an advisor or a prime teacher or whatever you're going to call them, their point person, because then first of all, hopefully you're seeing those students more frequently because of whether it's an advisory time or a prime time or whatever time it is, but a morning meeting. So you already have a window into who they are on a deeper level, and then coordinating conferences with just the members of your advisory. And I think that just creates, again, that really strong connection. And even though you might be on a team of 46 or 80 or 90 or 100 or 60, I don't think you have to sit with every family. I think, again, it's that really nice connection between an advisor, the family, and the student.
Lindsey, that's a great suggestion, and that's a model that we use, where the TA would be the facilitator of the student-led conference, or really the student was facilitating. They were the one of the adult partners in the process. And we also used a model where teachers and other adults in the building who are not core teachers often would be the second member of an advisory and sit with us in morning meetings, and they would also participate. So it would actually be two adults from the school, the parents and the child who work together. And I've seen it happen too, where even if there's not a second member who's in the TA, but there's an adult who knows the student well, scheduling those extra adults who maybe don't have TAs into the conferences to just be there and be a partner with in the process. That's a nice way to really be inclusive of all adults in the building, and also honor relationships that students have with other teachers. And I'd like to just mention that that is a shift from meeting with all the teachers, but if a parent really wanted to, part of what we do as teachers is we have the team meetings, or we meet at a different time, like student-led conferences or parent conferences. It's not the only time to engage with parents. If there's ever a concern, I always say, reach out, call me. It's my job to meet with you whenever you want. This is just one day that we set aside to do this work. But if you need to pull a team meeting together, let's do it. And so, finding that time, and also thinking about what families need to feel heard and successful.
Right. Nice. There were a couple more questions here. One was around that idea of how do we prep students for student-led conferences? How do they create goals and show evidence of growth? And the other one was around the platforms that we use. So I wonder if somebody wanted to just talk about the variety of ways that we prep kids for creating their conference, for creating their goals and evidence, and maybe a bit about what platforms are used for that process. Anyone want to jump in on that?
I can do that just because it was very recent. One of the things, and it's also important, I think, for teachers out there to understand that if you expect to get all this done in a week before conferences, you're kind of out of luck. You have to be building across the course of your program and across the course of the year. So I always like to look at the calendar, and I always say that I want to have my first goals kind of set at the beginning of October, because in the past we have had the conferences at the end of October, and that gives us time to have the kids collect evidence about those goals, so that and we can get to know the kids through the months of August and September to help them set those goals. But then in the week or two before the conferences, the weekly email, we have the kids talk about the conferences to their parents. We have a couple mailings that we send out explaining the PLP and also explaining what to expect. And then we send out a script to the parents, and we try and have the parents go over that script with their family. And then in class, we give the kids a checklist of the things that should be on their PLP based on what we've been working on. And then we have them practice the script a couple different times with each other. And so they're prepared really for the conference when they come in. And we spend a fair amount of time getting them ready for it and presenting it so that they're ready to go and everybody's familiar with the language and the expectations. And then I think also what's important is that we ask our parents for feedback after the conference to see what they thought about it. And we collect that data over time to see what parents have, what kind of suggestions they have. And then we also ask the students to reflect on their conference and to tell us how they thought it went and the strengths and challenges that they had, not only with their PLP, but also in the presentation.
Yeah, I can jump in next. I've talked about our hopes and dreams conferences before, and that's for our new students. So we catch them really early in the school year before the school year actually starts, to start looking at their strengths and challenges in different areas of the transferable skills, because that's what our goals are based on. And then for our returning students, we'll have some goal setting conferences again spread out throughout September and early October, looking at the goals that they had the previous year and seeing if they needed to adjust anything. But one thing that I think really helps with the prep is just getting the students super involved in their PLP early on. So like every week we have, this sacred half hour where it's just PLP time, and they're in their PLPs doing reflections, adding evidences on a weekly basis. So then by the time, the trimester is ending for us, it's not like a surprise that, oh, we need to fill our PLP and our Google site with all these different pieces of evidence to get ready to go. It's just something that's been ongoing. So I think they've had so much exposure to it that even by like October, early November, you should be able to ask any 5th or 8th grader in our team and say, what's your communication goal? And they should be able to rattle it off. That's kind of the expectation because they are so involved with it. And yeah, platform wise, we use Google Sites, which I think is super functional and is great for showing work. I know the whole district is shifting to Protean, which I think is a great platform and has a lot of bells and whistles to it that make it engaging for students. We're still, just the way we run our conferences, it's still a little tricky for us to use it just because when things are embedded like on a site, it's really fluid and easy for them just to talk about things and scroll down their page and see everything live versus having to click on different tabs and have like a million tabs open up, just because it slows the conversation down and makes it choppy. It's like, all right, let's wait for this document to load so we can see it. It's just nice for them to have like a live document or presentation or video within the site and just be able to click and watch it right there so they can show it. But yeah, I think both platforms for us have been really successful and useful.
Awesome. I'm looking at the time, but there's this last sort of like really important question, and it really is the crux of what we face, but it's about what do we do about those families that are disengaged, and how can we help? What are some successful strategies that have worked? I mean, I know we've talked a little bit about some ways that people have reached out or trying to sort of level the playing field a little bit, but if there's a really, really reluctant family or really challenging family to get, or a family where it's challenging to get them to come to the conference, what are some strategies that have worked to break down some of those barriers?
I think we mentioned, let's see, a few of them before, but whether it's, as mentioned earlier, going to them.
Yeah.
The school sometimes is not a convenient or a comfortable place to be. Mm-hmm. I think also providing opportunities like, it could be a conference call. Mm-hmm. It could be, there could be a number of different varieties, but continuing to invite them into the process, not necessarily invite them into the school, and not giving up. And I think also offering experiences that aren't just conference related, like whether it's potluck.
Oh, right. Like Melissa said that. Yes.
Yeah. Potluck dinners or experiences that are joyful and celebration type experiences where there's not as much pressure on them, where I think a conference still has this feeling that as a parent, I can feel it as a parent that there's judgment on, your parenting, even though that's not maybe the way that we frame our conferences. There's still that feeling as a parent going in. So providing opportunities to connect in a different way, I think are really important, but just continuing to reach out and offer tidbits and pictures and highlights. I think that's, just creating a positive relationship. So it's not this one-off conference experience.
One thing that my team that I was on, we would at our town meetings every Friday, we would identify students who had positive weeks and different capacities. But one of the things that we did is we would handwrite a letter that we had cards with a photo of the school, and we'd handwrite a letter to a family every week on Thursday. We put it in the mail. And we kept a spreadsheet just to keep track of who we had reached out to. And we made sure that every student received one at their house before December, before winter break. And then we would carry it on. So oftentimes they would, maybe get one or two throughout the year, but it just was a different way to connect with parents than sending an email or leaving the voicemail and not getting the call back. And it felt really good to know that we, were saying something personal about their kids. And I can't tell you how many kids came in the next Monday. Like sometimes they would bring the card that we sent to the house, or can you believe my mom got this letter? And it just was a really nice way to honor students and send something nice. Because, we don't get, I think about today, like you don't get many personal things in the mail anymore. With that personal connection. And so it just was something that we liked to do as a team.
It's a great idea.
And we took 10 minutes on our team agenda every week and just took the time then and did it and put them in the mail. And it just was a positive way to do it.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I think another thing too, and Don's talked about this with the relationship webs that he does, is identifying the other trusting adults that students have in the building, because at some point, you might get a family that's just, you don't connect with them and they're not engaged, but it's still important for that student to have, a community wrap around them. So I know sometimes, bringing in the guidance counselors or some other professional in the school that has a connection with that kiddo that they can, still come in for their conference and share their PLP with, is super powerful. And that's something that we've done at times.
And we have, I think we have it at both schools, but we have homeschool coordinators at our school, and those people through Howard Center usually, but they have such a strong connection for families, and families feel so comfortable with them. They are often the liaison to sometimes providing transportation, sometimes just moral support at a conference. Like they'll come to all the conferences, and that just has made such a huge difference for some of our parents who have a lot of anxiety about school, and just entering the building gives them anxiety. And our homeschool coordinator will go and pick them up and bring them in. And one of the teachers on my team actually went and picked up a parent too for a conference last year. And it's just sticking out in my mind because the parent went through the whole conference and at the end looked at him and said, that wasn't so bad. And there's so much anxiety about entering the building. And Peter just was, called him up and said, I'll come pick you up. It's no problem. And brought him home. And it just made a huge difference in the relationship.
That's great. That's great. Thank you.
All right. I think we're ready for our closing.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for an awesome conversation. Just kind of to close the conversation, I found a quote. It says, communication leads to community, that is to understanding, intimacy, and mutual valuing. And that was Rollo May. And I just think that speaks a lot to what some of the things we were talking about, how important that this school to family communication is, and having that be a regular thing that happens. So moving forward, there are some things going on around the state that we want to put on everybody's radar. So November 15th and 16th, that's the Youth Climate Leadership Academy at the Hulbert Outdoor Center in Fairleigh. The 15th, it's tonight. Choosing Equity, Advancing Policy that Helps All Kids Thrive. And that's in Stowe. This weekend, November 16th and 17th, is the Ebb and Flow of Optimism in American History. And that's in Burlington. So does somebody want to speak more to that one? Lindsey, is that?
That's can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, sorry. That's the Vermont Humanities Council. That's their fall conference. They have a speaker, I think, tomorrow evening. And that's open to the whole public, and racist ideas in America, from slavery to Black Lives Matter. And so that's free and open to the public. And then I guess the conference itself, you probably need to register.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you. November 21st is the next SBL chat for those of you that are Twitter users. That's a great one to join on to. November 30th, Building a Culture of Equity. That's Vermont Principals Association Second Equity Summit at Champlain College. Coming up in January 12th is our middle grades conference at UVM at the Davis Center. And then March 13th is the Family Beyond Bullying Conference at Champlain College. So a lot of great events in the near future.
Yeah, awesome.
Just real quick, Kev, I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Kevin, thank you very much for facilitating, and thank you, Melissa Akey, for being our guest. Very much appreciate it.
Yeah.
Kevin, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. And coming up next on December 13th, we'll have our 4th webinar, which is proficiency-based learning and assessment. So we hope to have everybody tune in for that.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Have a nice night.
Thank you.